Welcome to this audio programme on children's sleep problems. It's been produced in association with the Royal College of Psychiatrists and with the help of experts on sleep problems in childhood. The programme contains practical advice on how you can deal with the most common of these problems to ensure that your children and you get a good night's sleep. The first thing to say is that you're not alone. Many parents have to cope with the sleep problems of their children. In fact, there's some evidence that a quarter of 1 to 3-year-olds have severe sleeping problems.
Well, I've got 2 children. I think between them we've probably covered just about every sleeping problem you can have, from when they were very small babies, not seeming to want to go to sleep, screaming when they were put in their cot, waking up what I thought was an unreasonable number of times in the night, even when they probably didn't need feeding, wanting to come and sleep in my bed and getting up and getting into it in the middle of the night, getting up very, very early in the morning, and just really not being able to go to bed and sleep on their own happily is how I'd really describe it.
The problems Ruth's faced with her children are just some of those we'll be trying to help you deal with in this programme. Some of these problems are specific to very young children, others to the older age group, and elements of many can be found in both young and older children. Often the advice given for one age group can be adapted for the older age group. The people whom you will hear talking on the tape are health professionals with a wide practical experience of helping children with sleep problems. The techniques which they suggest do work, but you will need to persevere, a message that comes across frequently during the programme. Please remember that sleepless nights are not inevitable for you or your child. You don't have to put up with them. Sleep problems can start literally at birth. Of course, when you have a new baby, you expect to have disturbed nights. But most babies settle down very quickly, and by the age of 3 months have settled into a pattern of waking just once during the night. And by the age of 6 months, the majority of children should be able to sleep right through. Sometimes, though, problems can develop, as Jenny and Lee discovered.
He was actually falling asleep, being nursed to sleep. He was also waking up quite a few times during the night, wanting to come into our bed. He wouldn't go back to sleep after he'd come into our bed, and generally he just didn't want to be in his cot.
It caused a lot of tension, obviously, between myself and Jenny. We had a few arguments about it, what I thought we should do, what she thought we should do. Couldn't really agree on anything. It made our relationship very tense at times, and also we were snapping a lot at Aaron, basically because we were tired and annoyed that he wouldn't sleep, and he was really sort of attached to one of us and then attached to the other one and wouldn't leave us. You know, I don't know, it was very difficult to start with.
With another baby on the way, Jenny and Lee felt that they had to do something about the problems they were having with their 15-month-old son. So they went to the sleep clinic run by Glenys Sykes, a health visitor with Croydon Community Health Trust. It's one of a growing number of such clinics started and run by health visitors. Glenys offers practical advice, help and support to the parents of babies and young children with sleep problems. She told me that there are occasions when a child's sleep is disrupted for perfectly good reasons.
Any child who is ill needs dealing with, and none of the advice about sleep applies to any child who is ill. So if the child has a temperature or is generally different from what it normally is, it will need to be comforted and dealt with in the night. Cuddle it, pick it up, do anything that's necessary for an ill child. Teething sometimes causes a problem, but I think you have to be wary that you don't put everything down to teething. It's usually obvious if a child has a very bad toothache because its face will be red and it will be generally very miserable. Apart from that, I mean, children are obviously ill with things like asthma or a bad cold or cough, so they can't breathe. They will wake. The child will wake if it's too hot or if it's too cold or if it's thirsty, but it really doesn't need feeding. So any child who is thirsty during the night will drink cold or anyway water. It doesn't need a drink of milk during the night. So if it's thirsty, it will drink water, and you can always offer water, but that should be sufficient. It may just want to see mum, or it may, if it's using a dummy or something like that, have lost its dummy. But otherwise, really, most children will sleep, or at least when they wake, as we all wake during the night, it will just settle again if it's happy and if it's in a place where it knows it was safe enough to sleep in the first place, which is the way it is for most of us.
Difficulties in settling at bedtime and waking during the night are related to each other and are the most common sleep problems among young children, says Peter Hill, Professor of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry at St George's Hospital Medical School in London.
Well, of course, it's difficult for most children to learn to fall asleep when an adult parent wants them to, in the evening when there may be other interesting things on their own, which is what parents want. Parents want small children to, when they're put to bed, fall asleep fairly quickly without any other sort of aid or help. And that's a skill which children have to learn, and some will find it easier than others. They may find it difficult to learn to settle themselves, for example, because they are more than usually frightened about separation from their parents. Separation fears are common among young children, but some will have more than others. There may be a whole host of reasons which make it more difficult for the child in question to be able to learn how to settle themselves to sleep on their own, either in the evening or in the middle of the night when they wake. It's called night waking, but actually the vast majority of small children wake in the night in any case. But most of those can then get themselves back off to sleep again. So it's not so much the problem of waking during the night, because that's normal. The problem is because the child then can't get themselves back off to sleep on their own, and they either get frightened because it's dark and there's no parent to hand, or they get frustrated and angry and demand that their parents help them get back to sleep. So it's actually not quite so much a night waking problem as a failure to settle at night in most cases.
You may find that it's very helpful to keep a note of your child's sleep pattern over a couple of weeks, a so-called sleep diary, so that you can see exactly what's going on.
I think it's enormously helpful. I think it's very helpful, in fact, for both parents, if there are two parents in the same household, which may or may not be the case, to keep and look at that sleep diary. Sleep diary needn't be very complicated. It should have the time the child is asked to go to bed, the time the child does go to bed, the time the child settles to sleep, any waking during the night, and the time they're awake in the morning, and how much sleep they have during the day. It needn't be complicated, just a simple writing down on a piece of paper which can be pinned to the wall, for example. So it doesn't have to be a complicated diary. That very often demonstrates a number of things to parents, that the child is oversleeping in the morning, that provided the child isn't hyped up in the evening, they will sleep during the night, for instance. And the sheer act of keeping a record of how the child is sleeping and how they're waking actually cuts the whole problem down to size and makes it seem manageable, because otherwise I think it seems absolutely unmanageable for really too many parents.
Suppose, for example, that your sleep diary does show that the problem of getting your child to settle is that they get hyped up before bedtime. The obvious solution is to try to stop that happening. Though, as Professor Hill points out, that's maybe easier said than done, because in many households there are plenty of reasons why children do get overexcited before bedtime.
One is that is when a large number of children's television programmes, which are very commonly fairly hyping, are on, and particularly if they're older brothers and sisters, they want to watch these. And the smaller child, can jump up and down with associated excitement. You also have a problem with fathers suddenly deciding to be proper fathers and do something with their children when they come in from work, if they get home from work early enough, and they decide to have games which involve throwing small children up against the ceiling or chasing them up and down the stairs and so on, which are great fun and great and wonderfully exciting for all concerned, and probably very good for everybody, but not very good if you're trying to settle a child to sleep. And the other thing, of course, to watch out for is what the other children in the family are doing. And this may be a period of time in the family where the adults are trying to get some food ready or trying to get some housework done if they've both been out at work all day. So the children are left to their own devices. And again, if they're older children, these can hype a young child up quite easily. So there are a number of ways in which this happens. And of course, some of the things about bedrooms are very exciting for small children. Beds can be bounced upon. And some small children can take great delight in hurling themselves on the bed and jumping up and down. And the whole game of tease the parent starts. So it's very simple things, but in themselves produce an excited child, then extremely difficult to settle for understandable reasons.
The way to get a child to settle is to create a bedtime routine. Health visitor Glenys Sykes believes that such a routine is absolutely vital.
Basically, most, if not all, sleeping problems boil down to about the same sort of thing, which is the most important thing is the bedtime routine, I've found. And increasingly I think that is the most important thing, which is really that the child is fed its meal, whatever time the normal evening meal is. And then perhaps, depending on the age of the child, a sort of playtime for half an hour or so where it gets over its food, really, basically. And then there should be a division, a definite division between playing and being in the living area where everybody else is and going to bed. And the best way to get children to be happy about going to bed, especially toddlers, is probably to suggest they have a bath. Most children enjoy going into the bath, and so it's, oh, come on then, let's go and have a bath, as opposed to, oh, come on then, it's time for bed. And if they make a definite decision then that the child will not come back downstairs or back into the living area again, then there's a definite division between daytime and nighttime. And it's much easier to do if it's into the bath. So they go to the bath, they have a playtime in the bath and generally have a nice happy time, and go then directly from the bath into the bedroom, into their own bedroom, where hopefully they're going to have perhaps a drink. They can have it there in the bedroom, and the best way of all is for mum or dad, or preferably both, or the whole family together, to sit and read a story while they're having this last drink. And generally it doesn't have to be a story, it can be singing a lullaby or generally just talking about what's happened during the day, but a general calming down session where the child then associates that with nice comfort and a happy time with his parents, and then will go into the bed, and then the child should be put in the bed, said quite firmly, good night, off to sleep now, mummy's going downstairs, and left. And then things like whether the light is on or the door is open, or all those things really are personal things for the family. Some people like to leave the door open and the light shining in from the landing. Some people like to leave a dim light in the bedroom. Others think we'll just shut the door and done with it. And that is just a personal matter and something just for negotiation.
This kind of approach was one way of helping Jenny to overcome her little boy's problems in getting to sleep.
To establish a bedtime routine was one of the main factors. It's bath, straight into his bedroom instead of taking him downstairs like we were, giving him a bottle, reading him a story and putting him in his cot actually awake and letting him fall asleep. He would string out his bottle for as long as he could. He did cry for the first few nights, but we've been quite lucky. He adapted himself quite well to it, but no, it wasn't easy at all to start with. So it was just a case of persevering and hoping everything would work out for the best.
If there is a time when everyone agrees they should be in bed, they can have a 10-minute warning before that so that they're not suddenly pounced upon when they're in the middle of a particularly entrancing game or television show. They're given a warning, they're moved upstairs one way or another, carried, but not chased, I think, taken. However, there's undressing, there is sort of nightly washing, tooth cleaning, whatever it is, getting into pyjamas, stories, reading if that's the sort of thing, very good for them. One song, one kiss goodnight, that sort of thing, night after night, is a very good way of cueing a child into what is expected, which is to lie quietly waiting for sleep to come. The simple instruction, go to sleep, to a child just doesn't work. There are no children that I know of who can go to sleep just like that. It's impossible. We all say it, but it doesn't work.
Children may feel anxious if they're left alone in the bedroom. They may find it hard to learn to fall asleep, especially if they're nervous by temperament, what parents sometimes call worriers.
Thinking of it from the child's point of view, you're 3 or 4 or some age like that. When you get anxious or frightened, you want your mother in particular usually with you. She is the main way in which you cope with pain or cope with anxiety. Her presence will calm and soothe you. Therefore, if there's something that's difficult, like falling asleep when you don't want to be asleep, for example, you want your mother there. Now, mothers, and I'm using that I suppose, generically to cover all parents, are perfectly sensitive and sensible people and will do things to make things easy for their children out of the goodness of their heart. Good thing too. But the trap here is that what the child needs to do is to learn how to fall asleep alone. So the mother is doing a very sensitive and sensible thing by being with the child, calming their fears, helping them to get off to sleep, which is, after all, a separation from them, and quite alarming for some small children. But by doing this night after night, she's blocking, unwittingly, the child's ability to learn how to do things on their own. So she has to tread a very difficult tightrope, which is giving enough encouragement and support and reminding the child that she's around, while actually not being there for the 20 minutes or so that the child will take to lie quietly, waiting to fall asleep on their own. So it's very easy to see how what is essentially a bad habit can be set up, where the child demands the presence of a parent to soothe their own anxiety, to make themselves feel calmer, so that they can go to sleep, and the parents go along with that. But it's blocking the development of learning the new skill of falling asleep alone.
One parent who did go along with her daughter's need for her presence was Julia.
The main problem we've got with Rosie is she's 3 and she still spends most of the night in our bed. You can't get her to go to sleep on her own. She has a story, she has a tape, I go out of the room, and it doesn't work. So I lie with her to go to sleep. And if you lie with her to go to sleep in Mummy's bed, not in her bed, then she'll sleep, and you get a reasonable chunk of time where she's asleep, you're next to her. It'd be nice to lie next to my husband. If you put her to bed in her bed, she wakes and comes in. She doesn't get distressed, but she knows where she wants to sleep, and it's with us, and it means we don't sleep very well. We had a patch that was quite successful. We bought Rosie a new bed with a Postman Pat quilt, which was hers, her choice, and she got used to the idea that that bed was hers, and she went into the bed and would go to sleep with a bit of a fuss, but would go to sleep on her own in her bed. But the problem reoccurred when my husband's father died, and she was very aware of the stress that the family were undergoing at the time, and then she immediately reverted to polling back in with us.
So Julia's back at square one, through circumstances entirely beyond her control. But the initial success persuading Rosie to go to sleep in her own bed shows that there are things you can do to help your children who find it hard to get to sleep without your presence.
It's really the parent's behaviour we have to change so that the child gets different messages. So we have to look very carefully at what everybody's doing in the circumstances. I have come to believe that the most crucial thing is that the child is put awake into its cot at night, so that it actually feels and learns that its own bed is a safe enough place to shut its eyes and go to sleep. And then this then has a knock-on effect when the child wakes later in the evening or during the night. It can recognise where it is, that it was in the place where it fell asleep, and it will shut its eyes and go back to sleep. It doesn't look for mother's arms or the bottle that was in its mouth or the mother's breast or whatever. It knows that it's exactly where it was before, and will feel quite happy there, and will just go back to sleep.
But what should you do if your child doesn't feel safe enough to go to sleep at bedtime or when he wakes later on? How do you cope if he cries when he's left alone, or, if he's older, comes downstairs or into your bedroom?
The basic things would be things like not taking the child out of the cot or not allowing the child to come out of the bedroom. That has to be achieved in various ways. It's obviously easier if the child is in a cot, but if they're in a bed, then perhaps a stair gate would do, or shutting the door. There are various ways of preventing the child coming out. If it's an older child, and the problem is that the child can get out of its own bedroom and come into the parents' room during the night, which is often the case, the parents really must be prepared to take the child back every time to its own room and insist it stays there. And this is sometimes very wearing for the parents, obviously, because they're getting a very disturbed night. But if the parent allows the child to stay in the bed, the child will receive the message that if I carry on long enough, they will give in. And really they're just getting the wrong message. So the parent must be prepared to take the child back every single time until it realises it's no point in getting up and going into the parent's bedroom. And basically the same thing applies to crying. The child has to realise that however much they cry, the parents are not going to take them out of the cot.
That doesn't mean you have to abandon your child completely and leave him to cry himself to sleep.
Explain to the child what is required, that they need to fall asleep on their own, and the parent then tucks them up in bed and then leaves them there for a short interval and then returns after, let us say, a 3-minute or a 2-minute interval. It could be a very short interval. Tucks them up again and carries on doing that. Once they've got used to that over a period of 2 or 3 nights, then increase the interval so that you leave for 3 or 4 minutes and return after 3 or 4. And then a few nights later, once the child's got used to that, edge it up to 5 minutes before visits, then 10 minutes before visits. And in our hands, that's effective in nearly all cases in about 5 to 7 days.
You're letting your child know that you're still around. You haven't left him. He's completely safe and secure. But you're breaking the habit he's got into of only falling asleep when you're actually in the room. Glenys Sykes offers a slightly different approach, which involves tucking your child in, saying goodnight, leaving the room, and not dashing back the instant he starts crying.
Sometimes it's a good idea to say, make sure your favourite television programme's going to be on so you can sit and watch that and try to ignore the cries from upstairs. The other thing is that the mother can only do so much, and if she needs to reassure herself, she will need to go back to see the child. The important things are that she doesn't destroy everything by then picking the child up and taking it out of the cot. So she does need to make sure that each time she goes back, there's actually a longer gap before she goes back again, so that at least the child is getting the idea that even if I cry for 5 minutes, even if I cry for 10 minutes, even if I cry for 20 minutes, for example, it will gradually be getting the messages it's actually not worth it. And it just depends on both child and parent, particularly parent, as to how long this process lasts. Every parent can only do what they can manage.
It isn't easy to let your child cry and not pick him up to comfort him. Mothers in particular are programmed to respond to the cries of their own infant. But Jenny persevered with the programme suggested by Glenys.
When we went into him, he was always stood at the other end of his cot by his bedroom door. So we would lay him down, put the covers back over him, give him his teddy, and then say, we're just going to be downstairs. And we actually left the front room door open so that he could hear the telly, so that he knew he wasn't alone. So no, we didn't pick him up at all, which was what I found very hard, was not to pick him up when he was upset.
Actually, it sounds a bit cruel, but it's a sort of breakthrough in my life when I realised you don't have to rush and pick them up every time they whimper and scream. When my elder child, my son, was 10 weeks old, I discovered that if you actually left him to have a good cry, he'd sometimes go to sleep. And by then I'd learned that it wasn't necessarily distress or needing something, he was just having a good cry. So I just used to leave him in his cot, and obviously if he screamed for more than about 10 minutes, I go in and pat him and say it's all right. And after a while, he got into a routine of knowing and falling asleep. The waking up too many times in the night, I tried something I'd read in a book, which was a sort of, I suppose, controlled crying. And again, it's based on leave them to scream, but reassure them, go in, talk to them, but whatever you do, don't get them out of the cot. And although it's awful and you have to listen to it, and you have an awful, say, 3 nights, it did get better, and by the end of it they could sleep through the night, or at least till 5 in the morning without waking me up.
The important thing when your child is crying and crying is to stay calm and reassuring. Try not to be angry or upset, or to let the crying get to you.
Parents very easily fall into traps of thinking the child won't fall asleep because he is trying to manipulate me or trying to provoke me or seeing how far he can push me or he's just being naughty. And parents very easily then fall into the trap of giving an instruction like go to sleep, which the child can't actually do. And we can't get asleep just like that. So trying to think of the sleep problem as a discipline problem. The child should be doing this and I should be making them and I'm not, and therefore I'm a lousy parent and the child is being a naughty child, is actually the wrong way of thinking about it. I think it's better to think of this is a child who is trying to grapple with a situation where they haven't quite got all the skills, like being able to fall asleep alone, and what I need as a parent to be able to do is to help them to develop that skill in a pleasant way which will help our relationship and not result in a confrontation, because the confrontation itself hypes the child up and makes the problem worse.